Emilio's Ballato is an iconic, long-standing Italian restaurant in New York City. It's incredibly popular and it's a notable celebrity hotspot. Simply put, I had to find out for myself if the classic Italian-American cuisine served by the restaurant lived up to the hype and the high prices. It's a beautiful day today here in New York City. Right now I'm at Washington Square Park and I'm just relaxing after having had an excellent lunch at one of the most notable Italian restaurants in New York, Emilio's Ballato. The place is one of those classic Italian-American establishments that's been around for years, and it's also known as being kind of a celebrity hotspot, but more importantly, their food's supposed to be pretty good as well. Now, I've been burned in the past with some of these Italian restaurant celebrity hotspots in New York City, namely Bar Pitti, where frankly my meal was terrible. The pasta dish I had there was pretty much slop on a plate, and the chicken dish had to have been one of the most boring courses that I've had in the last few years. To be fair, I did really like my tiramisu at Bar Pitti. It wasn't a completely terrible meal, and perhaps it might have been better had I ordered different things, but the point of the matter is, if a place is popular, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. So I certainly went into Emilio's Ballato with a managed set of expectations. And thankfully, overall, I had a really great meal at the restaurant. However, there was one thing that I didn't like at all about the establishment. Having said that, this was my lunch at Emilio's Ballato. Emilio's Ballato is located right along Houston Street on the edge of the Nolita neighborhood of New York City. The restaurant was established in 1956 by John Ballato. However, ownership changed hands in the 1980s when Emilio Vitolo bought the restaurant, and it has remained a family business ever since. Over the years, Emilio's has cemented itself as one of the most classic and iconic Italian restaurants of New York. As a result, the institution is incredibly popular, but thankfully with their walk-in only policy, anyone can get a table. In fact, a 2011 New York Times article labeled the restaurant as like Rayo's, but you can get in. Indeed, I had no problem getting a table when I arrived to Emilio's a couple minutes before it opened at 12 for a weekday lunch. Dinner, however, probably would have been another story. Once I was situated, I took in the space. Emilio's is a small restaurant and there are only so many tables. In fact, the table that I was seated at was incredibly tiny. It basically felt like a stool with a tablecloth, but luckily I managed. Covering the walls are numerous photos of the celebrities and influential figures who have dined at Emilio's over the years. I liked looking at the pictures. They definitely displayed the history and character of the establishment. Right behind me was a photo of Anthony Bourdain, so I was in good company. Overall, I really liked the feel of Emilio's Ballato, and I wasn't even there during prime time when all the tables are full and the energy is at its highest point. After settling in, I began to explore the menu. Emilio's Ballato serves most of the Italian-American staples. It's the comforting sort of food that I crave, and the selection looked good. However, it seemed a bit expensive to me. For example, a basic spaghetti pomodoro was $35, while the veal parmesan was $90. New York City is no doubt costly, but that's above average even for NYC. Luckily, Emilio's isn't on a Salt Bay level when it comes to overpriced food, and I was still very excited to try a few courses. In terms of beverages, I didn't get a drink menu, and I'm not even sure there is one. So I asked my server for a glass of red wine, and that's exactly what I got. I'm not sure what variety of wine it was. It literally said 1 glass red wine on my receipt, but it was alright. There was nothing special about the beverage, but it did satisfy my wine craving. I also want to point out the water pitcher, which I like the look of. During this time, I noticed other tables around me were being served bread, yet I received nothing despite being at the restaurant nearly a half hour. Luckily, when I received my first course, I discovered why, since the dish was paired with bread. In terms of the dish I ordered, I went with the spaghetti alla pomodoro. The course was simple. It consisted of spaghetti with DOP San Marzano tomato sauce. My thinking behind ordering that dish was that I would pair it with the chicken parmesan. However, and this was my fault, I never specified that I wanted the courses to come out at the same time. Thankfully, that was a fortunate mistake because there was simply no room on the table for another plate. Frankly, I don't know how the hell 2 people could eat at the restaurant with a table that small. Some might have to dine balancing their meal on their lap. In terms of the spaghetti, it looked great, and I was eager to give it a go. The pasta was on the mark. It was certainly a simple dish, but it was executed just right. The spaghetti was perfectly cooked and texturally on point. My favorite element of the dish was no doubt the tomato sauce, which was very flavorful and clung to the noodles perfectly. I also liked how there were some good chunks of tomatoes in the pasta, which lent a bit of textural variety to the course. The final component of the dish were some basil leaves, which added a pleasant pop of freshness. When I was presented with the spaghetti, I was also given a bowl of Parmesan cheese, which I of course added to the pasta. Overall, I really enjoyed that dish. It was delicious, but was it worth the $35 price tag I paid for it? Absolutely not. In my mind, I was thinking of all the other top-tier Italian spots in the city where I had far better and more interesting pasta courses for less. But like I said, and despite the price, I really enjoyed that dish. Besides the pasta was the small plate of bread. However, the bread I was given seemed different from what the tables around me received when they were seated. While I think most got focaccia, I certainly didn't get that. In fact, my bread was toasted. First, I gave the bread a quick bite before adding anything to it, and it was delicious. It had a wonderful chew to it and a crisp, crunchy crust. Paired with the bread was a delightful glass of olive oil, which of course complemented the bread nicely. Plus, when I was finishing up my pasta, the bread did its job mopping up the remaining sauce. After finishing, I was presented with the dish that I was most excited about, the petto di pollo alla parmigiana, also known as chicken parmesan. Once again, it was a simple dish, but it looked fantastic. On the plate was a piece of breaded chicken topped with tomato sauce and fresh mozzarella. I couldn't wait to dig in, and I wasn't disappointed. The dish was excellent. First off, the chicken was nice and moist. The meat was tender and yielded to my fork and knife with ease. I felt like the chicken cutlet was the perfect thickness. It wasn't too thick nor too thin, which equated to a solid texture. In terms of the tomato sauce and cheese, I felt like it was the perfect amount, which equated to a balanced and incredibly flavorful chicken parmesan. Overall, I loved that dish. It ticked off all the boxes of what I want in a chicken parmesan. After finishing, it was time for dessert. The dessert menu at Emilio's contained no surprises, but a selection of tried and true offerings. I ended up going with one of my favorite Italian desserts, the tiramisu. The dish looked nice. It seemed like a textbook example of the offering, and I was excited to give it a try. That tiramisu just hit the spot. It was everything that I would expect from a good example of the course. Texturally, it was creamy and soft, and the flavor was a delight. That was a nice ending to an overall satisfying lunch with great and comforting food. Overall, I had a nice time at Emilio's Ballato. However, I do think that the restaurant gets a bit more hype than it deserves. The fact that the establishment is a draw for celebrities is no doubt an appealing facet, but a lot of New York City restaurants bring in celebs, but most don't feel the need to plaster their walls with photos of them. At the same time, I do feel like Emilio's provides a great atmosphere, and I only experienced a somewhat diet version of it, but I would love to return for dinner one evening. Plus, and most importantly, the food was really good. After finishing my dessert, it was time for the bill, which totaled to $120.85, but with my tip, I spent about $144. To me, that was definitely overpriced. In fact, if it weren't for the prices, I would be much more keen on recommending Emilio's Ballato because there's a lot to love about the restaurant. For me at least, I still enjoyed myself and had a good lunch. Overall, that was a really satisfying and enjoyable meal. I had a solid time at Emilio's Ballato. The food just really hit the mark for me. Frankly, I enjoyed every single dish that I had. The atmosphere of the restaurant was really on point for me. It's got that classic Italian-American restaurant feel that you would expect. All the pictures around the dining room really gave the place a sense of character and just something interesting to be constantly looking at. I really have no complaints about Emilio's Ballato except for the prices. Frankly, to me, the restaurant seems overpriced. Now, I love the spaghetti dish I had, but $35 for it was a bit too much. The fact that you can go to some of the best Italian restaurants in New York City, like Chirisi, Don Angie, Resdora, and get pasta dishes from those places for less money, and to have the courses be far more interesting than just basic spaghetti, well, that's saying something. Of course, Emilio Ballato is a popular place. It's got a good location on Houston Street, and frankly, I would expect the prices to be a little high, but not that high. At the same time, there are plenty of other classic old school Italian-American spots in New York City that would probably serve as a good alternative to Emilio's Ballato. However, I haven't been to many of those spots yet, so I can't say for sure. All in all, even though I think Emilio's Ballato is overpriced, I still had a great time there and really enjoyed my food. I would definitely like to go back to the restaurant, but I probably wouldn't be there too often, mainly because of the pricing. Still, there is an element of subjectivity when it comes to pricing and the thoughts behind it, so what may be overpriced for me may not necessarily be overpriced to another. In conclusion, I had a great meal at Emilio's Ballato. My stomach is full and my wallet is unfortunately a little lighter, but I will definitely go back to the restaurant. No matter what one says, it's a classic New York City establishment.